Hey everybody, welcome to episode 13 of my Great Guitar Build Off 2023 scratch build. Now today's episode is all about contouring bodies and the neck heel, and I know that's a pretty boring thing to watch, and so I decided that while you watch the video, I'm going to tell you the story of how I built my first guitar, and hopefully that'll make things more interesting. So I hope you enjoy it. So it was the year 2000, and the world didn't end like the Mayans thought it would, and the computers didn't crash like the techies thought it would, and that comet certainly didn't swing through and take a bunch of folks away like that weird bunch thought it would. And so life kind of just went on. And in those days, having a smartphone just meant you had a built-in answering machine, and YouTube was still about 4 or 5 years away, and hardly anybody I knew had the internet or even had a computer at their house. But we got a letter in the mail one day from our little small town phone company, said internet access was now available in our area. And so I signed us up. And I went and bought me a Dell desktop computer. Now, it was secondhand, but now this thing was fancy. Had a big old tower, had a bright blue light on the front of it, had a little wheel on the mouse, had a 19-inch tube-type monitor, looked like a RCA color TV from 1978. It was huge, probably weighed about 50 pounds. But I got this thing all set up. I got it connected. I got dialed up on the internet, and it didn't take me long until I had found the website for Ed Roman Guitars. Now, if you've never heard of Ed Roman, he was a huge guitar dealer out in Las Vegas in those days. And if you look him up online, you'll see that there always seemed to be some kind of questionable business practices surrounding, what they done in repairing these name brand guitars. But you can go read about that on your own. He passed away a few years ago, and we don't speak ill of the dead. But on his website, he had all of these name brand guitars. They had their house branded guitars that they built right there in their own repair shop. And he also had a whole bunch of boutique guitars from all kind of different, just small boutique builders. I'm talking about guitars I'd never even heard of. And some of these things were just beautiful. As a matter of fact, I had no idea they existed, or that you could even build guitars that look like this if your last name wasn't Fender or Gibson or Smith or something like that. And then he also had this section on his website that talked about the different tone woods and what their characteristics were, and what were good tone woods and not so good, and this and that. And then they also had a section of the website where they showed a bunch of pictures of their guitars that they built, and in various stages of completion. Well, y'all know what happened. I mean, it didn't take me long. I had already swallowed the pill, and I'm off down the rabbit hole. And I got to figuring that, hey, if people can build guitars that look like this, without a warehouse full of materials and fancy machines and factories full of skilled workers, if they can build guitars that look like this, then I can too. And so I kind of ended up deciding that, hey, I'm going to build me the meanest rock and roll machine that ever was. And I began to put this guitar together in my mind and visualize it in my mind. I'm talking about it was something else. Now this thing, listen, it had 24 jumbo frets. It had double shark fin inlays, had a slim taper neck, and it was candy apple red. I'm talking about with them great big old metal flakes like on a bass boat. I had me a couple of hot humbuckers in it. I mean, McDonald's chicken nugget lawsuit hot humbuckers. And then a Floyd Rose bridge with a locking nut so I could do dive bombs and pretend I was Mick Mars on the intro to Kickstart My Heart. Right? This was it. I was going to build this thing, and I was so excited about it that I decided to spend some money and make a long distance call and call a buddy of mine that lived in Wisconsin. Now, some of y'all young folks, you don't know what a long distance call is. Ask your grandma, she'll tell you. But I called him up. I got him on the phone. I said, man, Kevin, I said, you never gonna believe this. I said, we done got the internet down here. I done bought me one of them Dell desktop computers like they advertise on TV. This thing's so fancy. It's got a little wheel on the mouse. I done got on the internet and found this website. It's got this guitars on it and all this. And I got to looking at them, and I have decided that I am going to build myself a guitar. I'm going to build me the meanest rock and roll machine that ever was. And I just began to describe it to him, and I know that he could hear the excitement in my voice. And so when I was finished, though, he asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. He said, man, Rob, that's great, dude. He said, what are you going to build it out of? And you know what? I had this whole guitar planned out in my mind, what it was going to look like, everything it was going to have on it, and had not once thought about what I was going to build it out of. And I said, well, wood, I guess. And he said, I tell you what, he said, I got some walnut in the barn. He said, this stuff's old, big old slabs. He said, they belong to my great grandpa. He said, they're probably 100 years old. And he said, I probably ain't never going to do much with them. He said, I will cut you off a piece and send it to you if you want me to. And I said, well, send it on. I want you to. See, I had read on that website that walnut was a good guitar wood. And so a few days later, I get a package, and it's about a 2.5 foot long piece of about a 20-inch wide, 3-inch thick slab of just the heaviest, most clear, deep, dark chocolate walnut that you ever seen. It was beautiful. And so I looked at it and I said, well, this is surely big enough to make a good guitar body, but it's too pretty to paint, so we'll just have to leave it natural, but that's okay. And so I found a hardwood lumber yard about 60 miles away, and I went over there and got me a piece of maple to make the neck out of, and they had these rosewood boards that were about 3/8 of an inch thick, and I got one of those, figured I could make the fingerboard out of that. And so then I started gathering up my hardware. I went to different music stores around and got my pots and jacks and things like that. I could not find a Floyd Rose bridge, so I ended up with a Strat hardtail bridge, but that's okay. Couldn't find the exact pickups I wanted, but the one store did have some Seymour Duncan 59, so I picked up those and got some fret wire at one repair shop. And so I had a majority of my hardware, and I had all my wood, and I was ready to go. What I didn't have, though, was any clue as to what I was doing. I mean, none. And remember, we're still 4 or 5 years away from YouTube. So I'm not going to YouTube on the internet looking up tutorials for how to build an electric guitar from scratch. And there really just wasn't a lot of information online on those days about that. I went to my local library, and all they had was a book about acoustic guitar repair. Well, that didn't do me any good. I'm building a mean rock and roll machine. I ain't building no acoustic guitar. And so even though I was suffering from a huge lack of information and experience, I did have 3 things going for me. Number one, I did have some woodworking tools and some woodworking experience in that I had just built some bunk beds that didn't fall. Number 2, I had an old guitar that I traded some speakers for at a pawn shop, and it's just a no-name guitar, and I figured I could take it apart and get the measurements off that if I needed to, which I did. And then number 3, I had just enough naive confidence to believe that I could go out there my first time at bat and hit a grand slam and make this guitar just like I've got it in my mind. And so I got started. I got started whittling, whacking, filing, sanding, sawing, cutting, on that piece of walnut. And after 2 or 3 weeks, I got it shaped somewhat into, like a super Strat. That's kind of what I was going for. It was still way too thick because I really didn't have a way to properly thin it out. But I got it close to the shape I wanted, and then started on the neck, carving on my neck. And the one piece of hardware that I couldn't find anywhere was a truss rod. And I guess I was either too stubborn or too stupid to get online and find a place where I could mail order one. I did find an article online, though, about how a Gibson single action truss rod worked. And I figured I could just make my own. After all, it was just a steel rod with threads on each end and a nut and washer. So I went and got me a steel rod. Didn't realize till later that got it about 2 sizes too big. So we ended up with basically a piece of rebar in the neck for reinforcement. But I got my neck made, and it ended up being way too big. I mean, this thing was just like a 2x4. But that's okay. Got my fretboard, got a little bit of a radius on the fretboard, and I used that old neck from that pawn shop guitar to mark where the frets went. And I cut my fret slots with a flimsy back saw that I picked up at a box store, which did work amazingly well, by the way. And so I kind of had all this thing ready to put together, ended up routing my neck pocket out too big, and the neck just kind of flopped around in there. But really and truly, though, when it was all said and done, I had managed to cobble together something that kind of resembled a guitar. And it would play, and it would make noise, and it would almost play in tune with itself up and down the neck. But now in reality, what I had made was about a 15.5-pound monster with a 2x4 for a neck and a headstock that was comically oversized. I mean, it was as big as a dinner plate. But you know what? I was proud of it. It was my creation, and it was sort of a success and a failure for me. But now this is a true story, and I'm telling you this Number one, hopefully to keep you entertained while you watch me file and sand and rasp on this guitar body, because I can't imagine a more boring thing to watch than that. But so hopefully I've kept you entertained while you're watching this video. But number two, just in case anyone is ever watching this and you have not built your first guitar from scratch, but you're on the fence, you want to get out there and get started, let me just tell you, go ahead and get started. Just jump off the fence and get busy doing it. Listen, you have 100% of the access you need to all of the information and 100% access to all the tools and supplies that you need to build your first guitar right there on the device that you're using to watch this video. What you don't have is experience, and there's only one way you're going to get that, and that's just to get started. Okay, so, but let me give you two pieces of advice. All right, number one, please don't expect perfection. All right, I did, and I just set myself up for heartache. See, chances are the first guitar you build is not going to be a fine instrument. Right? Chances are it's not going to be a piece of firewood either. It's going to be somewhere in between. That's kind of how mine was. It's probably how yours is. Right? So don't expect perfection. And here's why. It's because we're not perfect. Humans, we're not perfect. The tools we're working with aren't perfect. The wood you're working with is not perfect. So there's no way that an imperfect human working with imperfect tools on imperfect wood can produce a perfect result. I bet you any master builder at Fender, Gibson Custom Shopping, if they were truthful, they could probably point out a flaw in any guitar they built to. Now, they're pretty good at hiding it, I'm sure. But there's going to be a flaw in there somewhere. It's just the nature, it's just the nature of things and what we're working with. So instead, just expect excellence from yourself, because, see, you can achieve excellence outside of perfection. So always just do the best that you can do. And here's what's going to happen. Your second guitar will be like mine. It'll be much better than the first, and the third one will be much better after that, right? So just expect excellence, forget perfection. And then the second thing is always remember that learning what not to do is just as important as learning what to do. I'm going to say that again. Learning what not to do is just as important as learning what to do. And here's why. Learning what to do will help you to make a fine instrument. Learning what not to do will keep you from making firewood and keep you from making a mistake that you can't come back from. So if you keep those couple of pieces of advice in mind and jump out there and get started, I think you'll do great, and I think you'll enjoy it. And so everybody, I hope you have enjoyed my story. It's a true story of how I come to build my first guitar. And I hope you enjoyed this boring video of me carving on this body. Please like and subscribe. Leave me a comment. Follow along. I think we're past the halfway point on this guitar build, and so it's going to kind of be going downhill from there. I appreciate you watching. Appreciate your time, and we will see you next video.